Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a very senior and accomplished professional from San Francisco, USA, Mr. Shel Holtz. Shel, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ashutosh. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Shel is the Senior Director, Communications for Webcor. He's a regular speaker on topics surrounding the application of online technology to strategic organizational communication. He's an author, and all of you know I'm very partial to authors. He's an author of a book titled Tactical Transparency, and there have been others. And Shel has been recognized, felicitated, and awarded several times. So, Shel, before we talk communications, tell me a little bit about your own background in brief.
In brief, I started as a newspaper reporter. I have a degree in journalism and worked initially for a daily newspaper. I made the move into corporate communications early in my career. It was in 1977. I took an offer to join the employee communications department for an energy company in Los Angeles, where I lived at the time, ARCO, which is now part of British Petroleum. Through my career progression after that, I was manager and then director of corporate communications at Mattel, the toy company, and also at Allergan, ophthalmic pharmaceutical company. I put in a couple of stints in human resources consulting firms in the communication practices. And then in 1986, I started my own consulting practice, focusing on both internal communications and the application of technology to communications, both internal and external. I did that for 21 years until the travel wore me down and I returned to the client side. I've been with Webcor since 2017.
Amazing. Thank you. So tell me, how does effective communication contribute to the overall success of a company?
In a variety of ways. Most of my career has been focused on internal communication, and it is one of the primary ways that you build alignment between employees and the leadership of the organization and the strategic goals and business plan that they have set in motion. It's the channel that provides for two-way communication. In communication, listening is a critical component, and for the internal communications to serve its role effectively, it has to provide input to leadership about what employees are thinking, what employees are saying, and amplify the employee voice. Employee voice is one of the four enablers of employee engagement, which has repeatedly been shown to be a very effective measure of an organization's effectiveness at bringing employees along and having them connect with the organization's goals and work in alignment with those goals.
And what, in your opinion, Shel, are some of the common mistakes people make when they talk of communication within the organization and outside, of course?
Well, I think the most common mistake is to think that everybody is a communicator. I don't presume to know how to do the work of an engineer, for example, but there's a general perception that, well, everybody communicates, so anybody can do this, and it doesn't require a professional. Of course, when you're communicating to achieve business objectives, that's different than the day-to-day communication we engage in with each other. I think another common mistake that we make is to believe that once a message has been sent, that is the same as that message having been communicated. There is more to effective communication than messaging, and just sending a message doesn't ensure that the recipient has internalized it, processed it, and produced the outcome that you had in mind when you delivered that message in the first place. We communicate in organizations primarily to influence people. We can influence what they think, what they believe, and most importantly, what they do. So it's behaviors that we are trying to affect with communication.
Very interesting. And of course, I remember when I was in the corporate world, there used to be this phrase which was communicate on a need to know basis. I'd love to get your perspective because I never agreed with it.
Oh, I'm on your side
Okay.
on that one. It comes from the same line of thinking that we have no comment when given a question that might be embarrassing or difficult to answer. In a crisis, very often legal counsel says, don't say anything. It can be used against us in court. In the meantime, not saying anything has a direct impact on your reputation, your credibility, and your stock price could be worthless by the time a case gets to court. So speaking on a need-to-know basis, what about what employees or what the public wants to know? What about what you want them to know? We talk about transparency in organizations and the importance of transparency, which of course does not mean sharing absolutely everything that the organization knows. There are things you don't want your competitors to know, future product introductions and things like that. You certainly, in the United States, cannot share employees' healthcare information. That's a legal violation. Transparency means making information accessible to people so that they can make informed decisions. And making that information available so people can make informed decisions is not an effective strategy if you're only sharing that information on a need-to-know basis. You don't know what information people are trying to access in order to decide whether to go to work for your organization or invest in your stock. Or possibly even write a favorable article for an influential publication about your organization.
Well said. Great response. Thank you. Shel, my next question is that how has technology started to transform strategic communication in recent years?
Oh, it's been spectacular. It's been, in a lot of cases, for a lot of people, overwhelming. When I started in communication in 1977, we had one vehicle for communicating with employees worldwide. It was a weekly printed newspaper.
Correct.
Now we can deliver content to our stakeholder audiences, internal and external, through multiple channels designed to reach people where they are. Increasingly, for example, I've just been reading in the last couple of days how in the Gen Z generation, TikTok has become a primary source of news, and there are people delivering that news by interpreting New York Times articles in short videos in language that resonates with that generation.
Right.
So, there are multiple channels, but it's also the fact that everybody is a publisher now. And the organization does not have a monopoly on content and the delivery of that content. Services like Glassdoor and the like provide ample opportunity for employees to have their own say about what their organization is doing and maybe challenge some of the messages and some of the perceptions the organization is trying to create.
Well said. And, when you look at it from another perspective, you and I are of the same vintage. And people used to say in the 80s and the 90s, bad news communicate on a Friday evening and good news communicate on a Monday morning. But I guess technology has done away with that also.
Oh, certainly. The bad news being communicated on a Friday was because the major news outlets had already presented their 6 o'clock news program, and people wouldn't be paying a lot of attention again until Monday. And by that time, the story would have lost its legs.
Absolutely.
Now we have a 24-hour news cycle. So that philosophy just doesn't hold water anymore.
Well said. My next question, Shel, is that how important is storytelling in communication? And how can organizations use storytelling to communicate?
Yeah, storytelling is vital. We are storytelling creatures. Story is at the heart of pretty much everything we do. And organizations that don't know how to tell a story are going to suffer as a result of it. There is the notion of a strategic narrative for an organization, which, by the way, is a second enabler of employee engagement. But it is the tale of the company's journey, where we came from, where we are today, where we're going, and why you should want to join us on this journey. And every stakeholder, from employees to shareholders, should be able to identify where they are in that story. When you have a strategic narrative, or as my friend Mark Dollins likes to call it, the story, then every other story you tell should be connected to it somehow, so that you can draw the line between this story that we're telling. It could be telling employees about a new project or an update to the strategic plan. It could be telling the public about your sustainability initiatives. How does that connect to your journey? And how does that demonstrate that you're taking the right steps on that journey? So you tell lots of individual stories, but they all have to be part of the story.
Right. Well said. My next question is that what goes into developing a communication strategy for an organization?
Well, first is understanding the business goals that the company's leadership have put in place. Communication that is somehow separate from business goals reminds me a lot of internal communication before it became a management function, when it was happy talk about the company picnic that was produced by an admin when profits were high enough to justify printing it. Today, most organization leaders recognize that communication is a management function, that it is vital to achieving business goals, and communicators need to be connected to those business goals and business plans and objectives to ensure that what they are communicating is going to serve those goals, while at the same time recognizing that the audiences that you are communicating with have their own interests. And so that's a circle that has to be squared in order to be effective at this. You have to make sure that what you are communicating is relevant to the audience, is interesting to the audience, and yet still results in that either reinforcement of behaviors, beliefs, attitudes, thinking, or changes to them. So it's that connection to the business that counts the most. And I've talked to a lot of communicators who don't speak the language of the C-suite, and I think that's not the approach that communications needs to take these days. We do need to speak that language first, if we're going to be taken seriously by the C-suite and get their support, but also be able to support their mission.
Well said. My next question is coming back again to technologies. Social media is moving at the speed of nanoseconds, and any communication that is being put out will disappear in less than a fraction of a second. What are some of the best practices for using technology to engage with your stakeholders?
Well, first is recognizing for each social media channel what works best. And you don't want to produce one message or one video and cross-post it across multiple channels. You want to use each for what it's best at and what its audience has come to expect of it. Then it's reinforcing that message across other channels, not relying solely on social media, but making sure that those messages are present through other means and having them reinforced in day-to-day conversations.
So my next question to you, Shel, is that how important is data analytics to improve online communication?
It's critical. If you don't measure, you don't know how you're doing.
Mhm.
I mean, if you're not aiming for anything, you can hit any target.
Mhm.
You need to know how, I mean, there's so many different approaches to analytics and
Mhm.
communications that we have to break it down into a couple of categories. First of all, there are the analytics that we as communicators need to know that our leadership doesn't care at all about.
Mhm.
And sadly, a lot of communicators stop at those. How
Mhm.
many people opened an email? How many people watched a video? But ultimately, again, we want to know, did they change their behavior? Did
Mhm.
they believe what they read?
Mhm.
And these are harder analytics to get to.
Correct.
You can't look at uh, a record of clicks, for
Mhm.
example, in order to arrive at that.
Mhm.
You have to do some deeper research. But
Mhm.
if you're going to demonstrate to the people who are paying you that communication is paying off for them,
Mhm.
you need those analytics in order to do that. I
Right.
mean, there's an entire association dedicated to measurement of communication.
Mhm. Mhm. Well said. My next question is on the ethical considerations that organizations need to keep in mind when they are using technology for communication.
Well, I think, first of all, ethics in general should be at the heart of all communication behaviors. This is why all of the professional associations have codes of ethics that they require their members to abide by,
Mhm.
and they don't evaporate in the face of electronic digital communication.
Mhm.
Uh, so if you apply those ethical standards to your online communication, you should be fine. Now, there may be organizations that are inclined to want to take advantage of these tools in ways that are not ethical.
Mhm.
It is incumbent upon the communicators to serve as a moral compass for the organization and talk
Mhm.
to the people making those requests
Mhm.
about the deleterious impact that that could have on the organization, how it could
Right.
impact their reputation and their credibility and their authenticity going forward.
Well said. So one more question relating to communication, then I want to move to your book. Uh, how does culture, and you live in probably one of the most diverse or culturally diverse countries in the world, how does culture impact communication?
You have to know the culture of the organization that you are the people, the audiences that you are communicating to. In a multicultural audience, you're probably going to have to do more than one communication. One size does not fit all,
Mm.
and understanding that would lead you to take a multi-channel approach
Mm.
and reach the segmentations of the audience separately. So there would be research, certainly, to identify the cultures of the organization and the cultures of the audience, and then research to determine the best approaches
Mm.
to reach them in an authentic way that is going to resonate with them and lead them to the conclusions that you're hoping to drive them to.
Wonderful. Shel, I'd like to now talk about your book, Tactical Transparency. Tell me about your book and your hypothesis when you wrote it.
First, I should give credit to John C. Havens, who is my co-author.
Okay.
We wrote that book together. It's been a while. That book came out some time
Okay.
ago.
Mm-hmm.
It resulted from a conversation that we were having online and a speaking engagement that we had that led us to talk about the possibility that there was a book in this,
Mm-hmm.
and it turned out there was. And the hypothesis is that social media provides organizations with tools that enable them to be more transparent
Mm-hmm.
to the stakeholders that they are engaged with
Right.
and need to build affinity with.
Okay. And you've also written other books, isn't it?
Yeah, six altogether.
Tell me a little bit about those books also.
My first book was about intranets. It was when they were brand new.
Mm-hmm.
There were no internet platforms at that time. It was pretty much departments had servers under an employee's desk and created a website, and then somebody said, gee, we need a directory for all of these websites that we have in the company, and they created a homepage. The term intranet was coined by Steve Tulene at Amdahl, and right around that time, I was doing a lot of work with organizations on their intranets, and didn't see any books on intranets at the time, so I wrote that. Then I wrote Public Relations on the Net, which was published in 2 editions, which was, again, an early book. The World Wide Web had not been introduced in its graphical format. The browser mosaic had not yet appeared. We were talking mainly about email and tools like Gopher Space and wide area networks and things like that. I wrote Corporate Conversations, which is a primer on internal communications. How to Do Everything with Podcasting, which I co-wrote with my podcast co-host, Neville Hobson, who's based in the UK, and Blogging for Business. Another book that I co-wrote that was written in relatively early days of blogging and talked about how business could take advantage of blogs as a business communication tool, marketing communication tool.
Fascinating. So I'm going to ask all our viewers and listeners to go and check out all the books of Shel Holtz. I'm going to do the same. Shel, my last question to you, and this is for the many, many people who will listen to our conversation. Based on your amazing understanding of communication, what would you say are 3 lessons you would want a lot of our young viewers and listeners to take away?
Well, I think the first lesson is that communication does not come natural in the business world, that it is something that requires study. It's a valuable management tool. It's not something that you do when you have to. It's not something that you do only when you have positive news to convey, that you are seeking to build alignment with your stakeholders, particularly employees. Alignment, I just can't understate the importance of alignment. And that, to your earlier question, ethical behavior is paramount. Public relations has a bad reputation because, well, first of all, here in the US, there's no license required to practice. Anybody can hang out a sign and proclaim themselves a public relations practitioner and engage in some pretty nefarious conduct. And that has led to a lot of media portrayals of public relations that are not flattering. And yet the real professionals understand that they have to always tell the truth, that they have to act with the audience interest in mind as much as the client or the employer's interest, and adhere to the standards of ethical behavior. So communication is not spin. It's not corporate BS. It has to be an honest conversation with the stakeholders that employs all of the professional models and capabilities that we can bring to bear.
Well said. And on that note, your wonderful lessons, communication does not come naturally. It requires study. The second you said was ethical behavior is critical. And you said for communication specialists, it is important to communicate correctly, rightly, and it's not a spin that you give to a message. Thank you, Shel, for talking to me about your own journey. Thank you for talking to me about so many different aspects of communication. I learned several new things about communication from you today. Thank you also for talking to me about your books. Thank you again and good luck.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to The Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for The Brand Called You.